Hello cruel world, my name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahamanus. Now on Thursday, April the 21st, during the cross-examination of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, Heard's lawyers played an audio tape of Johnny Depp self-harming. He was cutting himself with a knife and he was doing this in front of Amber Heard, who was begging him to stop. So, why do people deliberately self-harm? As a psychiatrist, especially during my training, I would often see people that would come in after taking overdoses or after self-harming. I've probably assessed about 200 cases like this. So drawing on those experiences, what are my thoughts on the types and the reasons behind people self-harming? What are my professional views on Johnny Depp's specific incident of deliberate self-harm? Is deliberate self-harm a cry for attention? Is it manipulative? Is it even fair to say that? Or is it judgmental? As a psychiatrist, how do I differentiate a cry for help from an actual suicide attempt? How do I do that risk assessment? I want to let you know because I want to give you an insight into how the brain of a psychiatrist works. And to a lesser degree, I also want to take over the world. What is the most extreme case of self-harm that I've seen in my career? I'm going to answer all of these questions in this episode. Welcome to my episode of A Psych for Soul Minds. All right, I'm going to give you a very brief background into the Johnny Depp case. Everybody and their grandma knows what's going on, but just in case you don't, Johnny Depp, 58, is suing his ex-wife, Amber Heard, for defamation after she wrote in an op-ed opinion piece in the Washington Post where she referred to herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. And due to Heard's allegations, Johnny Depp's career nosedived. So he was on the Fantastic Beasts franchise, but they dropped him and they recast him with Mads Mikkelsen. And then Disney also dropped him from the role of Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of Caribbean franchise. And then Depp is claiming that Heard is telling porcupines and has ruined his career. And then Ms. Heard is countersuing Mr. Depp. So blah, 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 you probably already know that bit. Let's get on to the relevant bit, which is the deliberate self-harm. So as I mentioned, Thursday, 21st of April, during the cross-examination, Heard's lawyers played an audio tape from the courtroom, and that was from July 2016, just 2 months after they filed for divorce. In the video clip, you can hear Amber Heard saying to Depp, "Please don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself, and put the fucking knife down." And then Depp can be heard saying, "There's a way for the pain to go away," which Heard replied, "It doesn't make the pain go away." When this video was being played for the courtroom, Depp could be seen with his head in his hands. He was refusing to look up at everybody. He grabbed a tissue and he was clearly trying not to cry. So what's my professional view on Johnny Depp's deliberate self-harm? Well, obviously I've not had the benefit of assessing him in person, so I'll tell you what I think with the limited information. I would say that a few things do stand out. So the first thing would be that this appears to be a one-off. This is not a pattern of regular deliberate self-harming, and also it was clearly done in front of Amber Heard. Now we all know that Johnny Depp has substance misuse issues, cocaine, alcohol, so it's very likely, I think, that it was in the context of him using, because as we know, these kind of substances can cause disinhibition. They can make people not really think about the consequences or judge their actions. So I think that Depp was so agitated at the time that in his mind, this is the only way of clearly communicating how upset he was. And you have to realize this is in the context of quite a toxic, dysfunctional relationship. So there's lots of arguing, there's at least accusations of abuse, physical abuse both ways. As to how accurate that all is, I don't think anybody knows for definite. But the point I'm making is that in such a kind of turbulent environment, individuals' distress can be drowned out. So I think Johnny Depp thought that this was the quickest and the clearest way to really communicate what he's feeling, which is that he's hurting and that he's suffering. So much of the things that I've just talked about are very common traits when it comes to deliberate self-harm, which kind of lets me segue neatly into the reasons that people self-harm. So pay attention, nerds, here comes the science. So from my clinical experience, the reasons are very variable. At the heart of it all, it's always in relation to some sort of maladaptive coping mechanism. And often it's also to release intense stress. As I said before, self-harm in adults is often linked to drug and alcohol use for the reasons I said before, disinhibition. And from my clinical experience, it's almost always in the context of an event or a situation which causes extreme stress. So the patients that I've assessed in hospital post-suicide attempt or post-deliberate self-harm, it's usually in the context of debts or of some sort of assault, sometimes a sexual assault, both the perpetrators and the actual victims themselves. And probably more often than any other context, it is related to relationship issues. Now, there are some cases where it can be a bit manipulative. So one partner self-harms because the relationship is on the rocks and they want to force the other partner to stay together in the relationship. More on that later. The other thing about self-harm is that it can actually release endorphins. So if somebody's suffering from a low mood from depression, it can actually increase and improve their mood. And that might be difficult for you and I to understand, but my kind of counter argument to that would be that people do things that lift their moods that are unusual to other people all the time. So off the top of my head, people are triathletes, they run marathons, people do MMA, cage fighting for fun, people get up on stage and do stand-up comedy. So what I'm saying is things that you might find terrifying or nonsensical or distressing can actually lead to an increase in mood. And the other thing I should say is that the psychodynamic kind of formulation is that for some people, they have these murderous kind of impulses. So they want to hurt other people, but they turn it in and they hurt themselves to quash these impulses. Okay, now here's a really interesting topic, I think. Do people who self-harm do it for attention? Now, obviously, I know this is a sensitive issue, so I'm going to choose my words carefully. And again, I'm just wanted to emphasize that this is coming from my clinical experience. This is from assessing hundreds of people. This is not just me making up ideas. So I would say this: some people definitely don't self-harm for attention. And I know this because I've seen people who self-harm who do it on their legs, for example, so people can't see them cutting themselves, and they've been doing it for years and they've kept it a secret. Having said that, some people definitely do it for attention. And here's the crux of what I'm saying. Attention is not the same as manipulation. Attention is putting across a message, and that message is, I need help. And as I said, I've seen it in many different contexts. So often it's in relationships or in families where they don't feel they're being heard. So the parents, the partners, whoever it is, might know that they're distressed or upset, but they don't know the full extent of it. So by doing this, whereas their family members might have been dismissive before, the person who self-harms is doing it so that they cannot be ignored anymore. And another context that I see is when the issues are the patient is too ashamed to disclose any issues. So for example, historical abuse. So by doing this, it kind of lets people know that there's something wrong and it opens up the conversation. Another issue or another circumstance that I've seen where people have self-harmed, and I'm not particularly proud to say this as a psychiatrist, is to get the attention of the mental health team. So maybe they're not being reviewed regularly enough. Maybe their next appointment's in 4 weeks or in 8 weeks, and all the doctor ever does is, tinkle around with the antidepressants. And this person is saying, I need more help. I need to be prioritized. Okay, right. Here's the interesting bit and the potentially controversial bit. As I said before, I don't think attention is the same as manipulation. We shouldn't judge people. Even though it might not be the healthiest way of expressing, there's a reason that people do that. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because I've definitely seen in my career that some people, some healthcare staff, find this difficult to understand. So I've seen, for example, A&E staff, accident and emergency, where you get these serial self-harmers that come in with multiple overdoses, sometimes as regularly as several times a week. And I've seen that the staff have no sympathy from them. And what I would say to that is even though what they're doing might be a massive inconvenience and it might be a waste of resources, nobody would put themselves in that situation lightly. So the point I'm trying to make is I think in these situations, something needs to change. Now, it's quite feasible that it might not be the role of the doctors or nurses, A&E, psychiatrists, whatever. Maybe it's like referral counselling, maybe it's social services because there's some deep family issues, maybe it's therapy for the whole family, maybe it's drug and alcohol rehabilitation. But even if it's not something that can be sorted out at that moment in time, I think the event itself should be a gateway for referral to some sort of services. So what I'm saying is I think staff should offer help and try and figure out what that help is, which might be quite difficult to do. It might not be clear, rather than being judgmental. So having said all that, I'd be very interested to know your particular experiences, my Psych for Sore guys and gals. So let me know in the schmoment section below if you've self-harmed, if you know somebody that's self-harmed, if you think that the staff have been helpful in hospital or not. I would love to hear your stories. Okay, I'm going to do a bit of a 180 now. Despite everything that I've just said, I've seen occasions where self-harm can be manipulative. And I really want to stress that this has been the exception, it's only occasionally. And for this reason, I can kind of understand why some staff, A&E staff, for example, might lack sympathy. I'll give you an example. So this is not a particularly unusual example. This is a fairly common presentation, but for some reason that one case sticks in my mind. When I was working in a hospital in Edinburgh as a junior doctor, there was an 18-year-old girl who took an overdose. And she made it very clear during our assessments that she did this specifically because she was about to break up with her boyfriend and she didn't want him to leave. Now, what's interesting about this assessment and the bits that I remembered is that she had more tablets at her disposal. So she had paracetamol. I think she took about 6, which is not a very big overdose at all, but she had lots more tablets available, meaning that she had more of an opportunity to hurt herself. Plus, crucially, she called the ambulance herself, called her ambulance, then she called her boyfriend. And we assessed her, she stayed overnight, she had to have some treatment. So for you science nerds out there, you give N-acetylcysteine, that's the antidote for a paracetamol overdose. And the next day she was laughing, she was smiling, her boyfriend came to see her, they'd made up, they were giggling, and she even self-discharged against medical advice. So even though it's a pretty small overdose, so I think everybody knew that there was not going to be any permanent liver damage, it's still feasibly possible. So we still need to do serial blood tests of liver function tests of these enzymes to see how damaged her kidney was. And you have to space it out over several hours because of the way that the enzymes are broken down. But despite all that, she left against medical advice. And I suppose, if I'm being blunt, there's 2 ways you can look at this. You could say that even though what she did was extreme, the event did, in a way, resolve the situation because she did get back together with a boyfriend, arguably not a particularly healthy relationship. Or you could take the other perspective, which is that it's a waste of resources and hospital time, possibly disrespectful to the staff that are looking after her, especially in a place like A&E when you've got really sick, injured people in pain waiting to see a doctor. What do you think? Which one of those 2 kind of perspectives would you take as Psych for Sore guys and gals? Let me know. Something that obviously I have to speak about is whether self-harm is a precursor to suicide. So from my experience, it's actually very low. The number of people who come in with self-harm, either cutting themselves or post-overdose, the actual number of people who I genuinely think were actual suicide attempts is very, very small. It's probably less than 5 or 10%. Having said that, even if self-harm is not intended to be a suicide attempt, we know that those people who engage in self-harming behavior eventually have a risk of suicide. And we also know that the more that somebody self-harms, the more regularly, the more their risk of suicide at some point later on in their lives. Which is why psychiatrists have to be extremely careful and thorough when we do our risk assessment. So we look at things like whether they called the ambulance themselves, suggest they didn't want to die, whether they left a suicide note, suggest they did want to die. Here's a crucial one, whether they knew that they would be found. So if somebody, for example, hangs themselves or sets up the fumes in the car in the garage when they know that their spouse is going to come home, then arguably they want to be found to a degree. By the way, if this interests you, I've got a really interesting video, one of my very first videos, where I interviewed a lovely gentleman called John Clarke, who's an ex-police officer, saw some horrible things in the line of work, developed post-traumatic stress disorder, had a suicide attempt, was found hanging in the forest by his own colleagues, by police officers that he worked with, and they had to forcibly take him in to be sectioned in hospital. Really emotive, really fascinating chat. Go check it out. The link will be in the comments section. So what's the reason that we have to do this risk assessment as psychiatrists? It's because a small proportion of these people that come in need hospitalization. And if they refuse, they might need sectioning. So we need to make that distinction. It's literally life or death, which is why I think it's very dangerous to be extra dismissive of people that come in with suicide attempts, especially if they come in the context of being drunk, plus they've had lots of previous smaller or milder suicide attempts before. I've literally seen civil court cases and I've given evidence in cases where this exact thing has happened, where somebody's risk has been minimised, the patient has been dismissed, they've ended up killing themselves, and the family has sued the trust and the doctor. The other thing I wanted to say is that, contrary to popular belief, self-harm is not always in the form of cutting. It can be burning, it can be bruising. Sometimes people use rubber bands, which can be a strategy to stop them cutting themselves. And then if you're sort of taking a broader view of it, self-harm could be in the form of alcohol and drug use. It can be sexual promiscuity. It could be biting, scratching, picking at wounds. When I self-harm, I watch Dr. Grande videos. Okay. Now, to finish off this episode, I'm going to tell you about the most extreme case of self-harm that I've personally seen in my career. Before I do that, I just want to quickly introduce you to this channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. I am a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I professionally assess people in courts and prisons and secure units. I give evidence as an expert witness in criminal cases. My channel is a smorgasbord of videos related to mental health with a twist of psychiatry. And true crime as well. If you're interested in this kind of topic, a bit morbid, I've got videos on Is Suicide Selfish? Julian Assange's risk of suicide in Belmarsh, and also Jimmy Savile's access to Broadmoor, a hospital where I've worked in the past. If you're interested in any of that, the links will be in the comments. Go check them out. Okay, so I'm going to finish by telling you about the most extreme case of self-harm that I've seen. I talk about this extensively in my book. If you're interested, it's called In Two Minds. Go check it out. So I call her Pamela. That's not her real name. She was a petty offender who I'd see in prison quite regularly. She'd come in, usually in the context of a minor assault or stealing something from a shop. She had a learning disability, which is like a pathologically low IQ, and she also had borderline personality disorder. You might have heard the phrase, just very, very briefly, it is associated with an unstable mood, explosive relationships, getting into lots of fights and arguments, deliberate self-harm, taking drugs, acting impulsively. So the context of her self-harming, I think, was that she was rejected by many, many people. Her own family gave her up for adoption. Mental health services would kick her out the door because she was a nightmare to deal with. Men would use and abuse her. And she had a learning disability, which meant that she wasn't as clued up enough to understand how the world works and understand social cues. So she would self-harm horrendously. Not only would she cut herself when she was in prison, but she would also, when she got stitched up, she would intentionally pick the stitches. She would insert bits of pen into her wounds really far up, so she had to be operated on. Bit of a trigger warning here. On more than one occasion, she splashed dirty toilet water on her wounds intentionally so that they would be infected. Why did she do all this? I think it's because she really wanted to be in control. So most of her life, she was rejected by people, she was told what to do, she was controlled. And I think that this is one of the ways that people take her seriously, and she had control of the situation. The most intense experience that I had with her is that one day she managed to get a knife somehow into a room in the healthcare unit, not sure how, and she slashed her wrist so much that blood was literally hosing out. I didn't see that happen. I got there minutes afterwards, by which time she'd been carted off to hospital to be operated on. But my lasting memory is that this cell, I'm not kidding, had about an inch worth of blood on the floor, and there were prison officers in hazmat suits looking like it's a Beastie Boys video, mopping it up with blood. So sorry about the morbid, gory imagery there, but I just think it's interesting, so I thought you might want to know. Okay, I'm almost finished. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, I'm going to do another video coming up on my channel very soon about Amber Heard and her diagnoses of personality disorder. Have a blessed day, stay euthymic, buy my book, see me at CrimeCon UK, and do not forget, I love you.